unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory of Tiohtià:ke, which today is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. We are delighted to be able to facilitate the space for discussion on the future of food policy in this country. Food Secure Canada strives to amplify the power of diverse voices to transform our food system through dialogue and advocacy. And we are grateful for this opportunity to hear from so many inspirational members of our collective food movement. We will begin by allowing for an update on the current status of the food policy for Canada, first from Jason Baillargeon, the Director of the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and then from Melana Roberts, current member of the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council and also former chair of Food Secure Canada. Next, we will have the opportunity to discuss specific areas of the food policy and provide recommendations towards a renewal of the food policy for Canada. This will take the form of 7 different breakout groups, and we have included backgrounders for each group on our website to facilitate discussion. At the end of the session, we will rejoin as a single group, and moderators from each session will report their findings. So with that, I would like to invite Mr. Baillargeon to provide us with an update from AAFC.
Hey, thank you, Wade, for the introduction, and thank you, Marissa, as well, for all the great work and leading up to this event, and very much appreciate being invited to participate this afternoon. And also, building on Wade's comment, just thank everybody who have joined to share perspectives to shape more equitable, sustainable, resilient, and healthier food systems in Canada. Je prononcerai mon allocution principalement en anglais aujourd'hui et j'aimerais remercier le Réseau pour une alimentation durable d'avoir assuré l'interprétation. Cela dit, je serais ravi de répondre à toutes questions en français ou en anglais. I would like to begin by acknowledging I'm joining today on the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Food systems are interconnected and integral to the well-being of communities, including Northern and Indigenous communities, public health, sustainability of the environment, and the strength of the economy. The importance of engaging meaningfully across food system actors and stakeholders and partners cannot be underestimated. That is why in developing the food policy for Canada, the first back in 2017, we engaged extensively in that regard. Food Secure Canada played a key role in that process and continues to make positive contributions to advancing food security and food sovereignty by bringing together diverse people and organizations, facilitating and supporting networks to advocate for food policies that reflect diverse perspectives. I think today's a great example of that, and I really look forward to the discussion. As we think about renewing the food policy, and for those who may not be familiar, I'd like to provide a brief overview of some of the work to date and some of the key initiatives, reflecting on respective objectives and intended outcomes, and share some thoughts on early feedback we received. A few questions that come to mind for discussion, and just want to bring that for people to consider as you move into the breakout groups, as well as kind of reflecting some remarks I provided. Are there gaps in the policy or near-term action areas that were initially launched in 2019? What are the opportunities to improve policy and program alignment? Are there mechanisms or initiatives that should be explored that would make more meaningful progress towards achieving the food policy's objectives? So the policy was launched to advance a coordinated approach to tackle complex food issues. It was designed to consider all stakeholders and partners and interdependent activities involved in the production, processing, distribution, consumption, and disposal of food, and the resulting social, health, environmental, and economic outcomes. The policy was launched in 2019 and included $134 million in investments to be delivered over 5 years to address the most pressing needs, and where gaps were identified in existing Government of Canada programming, notably around food security and food loss and waste reduction. I'm going to touch first on the Local Food Infrastructure Fund, ou le Fonds des Infrastructures Alimentaires Locales, FIAL. FIAL est un fonds de 70 millions de dollars sur 5 ans pour soutenir les achats d'infrastructures afin de renforcer les systèmes alimentaires locaux. Une nouvelle demande a été annoncée plus tôt ce mois, dans le 31 mai, pour mobiliser 10 millions de dollars supplémentaires annoncés dans le budget 2023 afin de fournir des subventions pour aider à accroître la sécurité alimentaire grâce à des investissements dans les besoins en infrastructure. À l'origine, l'intention était d'avoir des volets distincts pour soutenir les petits projets ainsi que les plus grands projets du système alimentaire. Le programme a évolué au fil du temps et avec le début de la pandémie, la demande s'est déplacée vers des initiatives à plus petite échelle qui pourraient être mises en œuvre dans un délai relativement court. Ce programme avait une forte demande avec des projets visant à accroître la capacité des gens à accéder à les aliments. As we've implemented the Local Food Infrastructure Fund, we have heard feedback that having to obtain funding from various sources, since the Local Food Infrastructure Fund only covers infrastructure, can be challenging for applicants, and opportunities are expressed for government to look how we can better coordinate existing investments across government to improve food-related outcomes in communities. Partners have told us that the application-based programming does not reflect Indigenous self-determined approaches. The Food Waste Reduction Challenge is a $20 million initiative to incent innovation in the sector. Grand prize winners will be announced by March 2024. Given that food waste is a complex problem, the intent of the challenge was to tap into new ideas and new applicants by using a new approach by providing prize funding once results are achieved. Program participants report that the initiative was crucial to support partnerships and leverage new investments to address food loss and waste. Some of the semi-finalists who were not chosen to move on to the finalist stage have told us that competing encouraged them to advance their work in a way that would not have been possible or have happened had it not been for the challenge. Innovators were also able to use AAFC funding in a way to leverage new investments. The National School Food Policy Budget 2022 reaffirmed the commitment of the Minister of Agriculture and Food Canada and the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development to work with provinces, territories, municipalities, Indigenous partners and stakeholders to develop a national school food policy and explore how more Canadian children can receive nutritious food at school. ESDC, or Employment and Social Development Canada, is leading engagement, including online public consultation that generated over 5,000 submissions and targeted sessions with stakeholders to inform development of the policy. AAFC led a Connecting Schools Local Food Systems Roundtable in December that included representatives from the agriculture and food industry, civil society, health and environmental organizations, academia, provincial and territorial governments, and organizations representing Indigenous and underrepresented communities. We also been working and engaging with the Pan-Canadian Black Food Sovereignty Caucus, and will continue to work with equity-deserving groups to reflect perspectives and develop approaches defined by communities. In terms of some overall reflections on the policy as a policy and kind of thinking outside of the initiatives, much has changed since we launched the food policy that largely reinforces the need to further deepen and broaden work towards healthier, more sustainable, and more equitable food systems. Notably, the pandemic's impact highlighted fragilities in supply chains and the need for more resilient food systems. It also exacerbated food system inequities and systemic barriers to access affordable, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food. People facing financial constraints, racialized groups, and those living in rural and remote areas were disproportionately impacted by environmental emergencies such as the BC floods and Hurricane Atlantic provinces, and by rising food prices and inflation. For AAFC's part, many initiatives led by the department represented a significant shift in our activities and programming as we consider food systems more broadly and engage with stakeholders and partners that were beyond the agriculture and food sector. The policy's overall framework, overarching vision, long-term aspirational outcomes, and whole of government approach have been well received, and we have identified opportunities to further improve coherence among policies that impact or are impacted by food and to align actions across Canada's food systems. Building on the 2017 consultations, we continue to advance engagement that brought together diverse perspectives from across Canada's food systems, for example, through the UN Food Systems Summit dialogues that many of you took part in. It's clear that additional work needs to be done to bring forward voices from underrepresented groups to shape food systems that reflect the priorities of the communities and to work directly with Indigenous partners to meet commitments outlined in the policy's framework. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on implementation of food policy to date, to understand views on gaps in the policy or near-term action areas, and opportunities for improving policy and program alignment. I would also be interested in your observations on other mechanisms or initiatives that could potentially be explored to improve the policy's impact and effectiveness in achieving the vision and long-term outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm now going to share a video from Melana from the CFPAC, the Food Policy Advisory Council. Unfortunately, Melana could not make it today, but she kindly sent us a recording to provide us with an update on the CFPAC. So I'm going to share that right now with you all. Sorry, just give me 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Melana Roberts. I'm a municipal and federal food policy strategist, community advocate, and civil servant based in Ontario, living and working on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. Thanks for having me. I was invited here today in my capacity as a member of the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council to briefly share some of the highlights and progress of our work to date. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the current Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council is comprised of 19 members representing experience and expertise from across the food system, from self-determination and Indigenous food systems to labor, food loss and waste, food insecurity, supply chain distribution, local procurement, emergency food provision and planning, school food, and sustainable agriculture and farming, to name a few. The council is chaired by Evan Fraser and Sylvie Cloutier, and members have been appointed for 2 to 3 year terms to advise the Minister of Agriculture on the implementation of the food policy. Within that scope, members advise on current and emerging issues, identify challenges and opportunities, as well as assess gaps for ministerial and departmental action, and make recommendations on the implementation of 4 priority action areas and 6 outcome areas you heard Jason speak to. In addition to that, we also share information and best practices. Now, since officially launching activities in 2021, the council's met 7 times, primarily virtually, with 1 in-person meeting, and has been engaged to inform and develop on emergency response plans on food systems as part of Protecting Canada's Food System Auditor General's report, the agricultural labor strategy, food loss and waste definitions to ensure food loss and waste work is standardized with key tracking and best practices in place, Canada's Green Agricultural Plan to enhance a climate lens and expand more sustainable agricultural practices, advising on food security funding in Budget 2021, and on school food implementation, including convening consultations with key stakeholders on school food, participation in the UN Food System Summit sessions, and support to develop Canada's National Pathways document. For more information on any of these items, you can access our meeting summaries on public record on the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council website. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that as inaugural members, we also supported the development of the terms of reference for the council and established other foundational processes to best support consultation and feedback during the policy development process. Now, over the past 2 years, the council's work has also shifted in orientation, moving from the development of proposals, research, and consultation with stakeholders to inform draft recommendations on key priorities, including things like school food loss and waste, food insecurity, and sustainable agriculture, to primarily advising on consulting and on existing policy proposals and priorities led by Agriculture Agri-Food Canada staff and currently named in the minister's mandate. Now, although some advancement has been made, it has not been without its pain points. We continue to see gaps in the representation of key lived experiences on the council. We need better efforts to leverage local procurement opportunities and embed the integration of an Indigenous food sovereignty and self-determination lens across the board. There are also challenges around the measurement of food insecurity and a need to standardize and develop disaggregated race-based data collection as well as analysis to understand the issue and who is most impacted. On that note, I think it's also important to share that we have also discussed to what extent food insecurity falls within the mandate of AAFC and how they'll need to engage other divisions to departments to effectively move the needle on this important issue. And last, but certainly not least, there's a recognition that we need to see a food systems lens and whole of government approach employed as a foundational philosophy to inform improved food policy planning, governance, and more transparent and collaborative implementation of Canadian food policy priorities from coast to coast to coast. Now, looking ahead, there are a number of exciting things down the pipe. The Food Policy Secretariat in AAFC will be working to fill some existing vacancies on the council, bringing new energy, insights, and improved representation of underrepresented perspectives and groups, and will be launching recruitment for new members for the next cycle of the council. As we continue to codify effective ways of working to inform ongoing joined-up food policy governance, we're excited to have some traction in strengthening a cross-departmental food systems lens by hosting our first joint council meeting between the National Council on Poverty, who advises Minister Gould, and the Canadian Food Policy Advisory Council. And as we hope to discuss intersections and opportunities between poverty reduction strategies and the reduction of food insecurity rates. I want to thank you again for having me and the opportunity to share this update. Wishing you all a productive discussion at today's town hall and consultation. Bye for now, Miigwech.
Thank you for sharing that, Juliet. Hi, folks. My name is Marissa Alexander. As Wade mentioned, I am one of the other co-executive directors at Food Secure Canada. So I first just want to say thank you to Larry for opening us up in such a beautiful way, as well as Jason for sharing those thoughts, and Melana as well for sending in a video to kind of get us started and set the table for having some of these really important conversations. I also want to just thank our team who has worked very, very hard to make this work, and all of you folks for joining us and for being able to have these consultations. It's very, very important, and we're so thankful that you're all here. So I am just going to jump in and start explaining what we're going to be doing when it comes to the breakout rooms. So shortly, we're going to open up the breakout rooms. There will be 7 rooms, and you have the ability to join any room that you are interested in sharing your thoughts on, and you're more than welcome to pop in between rooms if you have multiple thoughts and you want to share on multiple topics. We are going to spend 30 minutes in the breakout rooms in total. We'll give folks a 2-minute warning when we're about to come back, and then we'll come back as a group, and hopefully the moderators and or somebody who has been identified will share a quick 2-minute highlight of some of the pieces that came up. But just to note that all of the information captured in the breakout rooms will be shared with AAFC, not just the updates that are shared back out. So no worries if something is missed, and don't feel like you need to capture the entire 30-minute conversation in 2 minutes. We also have moderators in each groups and note takers who will be sharing, who will be taking notes on a mural board, so you can all see that. Hopefully, and feel free to let us know if you're having any issues with seeing folks' screens. And as mentioned, please feel free to share your thoughts on the topics, as well as any areas that are maybe related that you feel like could be included in future. Those are important things for us to know, and for to be included in the food policy in future as well. So I will just let you know all of the different topics for our breakout rooms, and then we can open it up and we'll walk through getting through. Perfect. Thanks, Juliet. Getting into those breakout rooms. So our first breakout room, number 1, is loss and waste. We also have strengthening Indigenous food systems in breakout room 2. We have school food, as well as resilient communities. There's a food security breakout room, and une groupe francophone pour personnes qui plus confortables à parler en français pouvait être en groupe 6. And then lastly, we have the governance group in group 7. So I believe the breakout rooms should be opened shortly, and you can feel free to go into whichever group you prefer. Awesome. And then for those who are maybe not as comfortable joining breakout rooms, I will walk through how to do that. But for everybody who is comfortable, feel free to join now. For those of us who are still learning Zoom, so there's a couple different ways to join, and depending on the setup of your screen, you may have the bar at the bottom of the screen, or it may be at the top of the screen. But what you're looking for is the bar that has things like the participants and the chat and the record button or the captions button. There should be either 3 dots that tells you there's a breakout room, and you can click on that, and then it'll list the different breakout rooms, and you should be able to join whichever one you prefer. And if yours is not 3 dots, it may be 4 little squares, and it says breakout rooms. When you click on it, it again will have a list, and there should be the join option, and you can join whichever group you prefer. There will be folks in this room if you are having troubles getting into a room. So if you need some support, let us know, and happy breakout rooming. People are trickling back in slowly but surely. We'll just give it a couple minutes. Whoa, a bunch of people coming back in right now. Okay, I think we're coming back up to our total group, and hopefully folks have made it back in. Thank you, everybody. And I mean, I was only in one group, but there was great conversation happening. So I'm hopeful that everybody felt the same way. Being mindful of time, let's jump into a bit of a 2-minute, aim for 2 minutes, report out about some of the big highlights, the big pieces that were chatted about in your group. And just a reminder to note that if you don't remember everything, that information is not lost. We still have that information. It will still be included. This is just for folks that maybe were in one group and want to hear a little bit more about the types of conversations that were happening in other groups. So to get started, I'm just going to go through in order of the breakout rooms that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and start with group 1. Kate, could you let us know some thoughts on what happened in the loss and waste group, please and thank you.
Thank you. Yes, a lot of diverse expertise, a great conversation. So there were 3 threads to the conversation I would suggest. One is that the federal government can play a role in active policy and programming around food loss and waste through things like donation policies, measuring and monitoring policies, through supporting business innovation and providing supports to small and medium enterprises, through infrastructure provision, through guiding and regulating extended producer responsibility. So thinking about what the government can do and the ways that the Food Policy Council can play a role in that. There was also a conversation about how we should see those kinds of interventions. Should it be through enforcement or financial incentives? Should it be more through education? The creation of knowledge repositories, for example, to enable certain conversations. And then there was also a really rich conversation around the principles that should be followed when we talk about food loss and waste. So questions around who should be paying for it, and should it be the generators in particular, the role of community involvement and coordination in building new systems, and around food security. When we talk about food loss and waste, very strong messaging from the people in the room that we cannot easily conflate those ideas, that food insecurity is an income insecurity issue, and that food loss and waste solutions are for all people to be eating food that is currently lost and wasted. And we might be able to generate some income through some of these innovations that might have some downstream income effects, but we cannot just simply put together food loss and waste and food insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That sounds like a very rich conversation. I'm excited to watch all these other ones because I am fascinated. I wish I was in all of the rooms. Okay, thank you, Kate. Next, we're going to ask Larry. Could you share what happened in the Strengthening Indigenous Food Systems breakout, please, and thank you.
Okay, try again. I got a message to unmute myself. I thought I was. So we talked about the importance of Indigenous voice, about governance. I brought up Pathways 1, the Convention on Biological Diversity, which has access and benefit sharing as the third protocol and a relationship to Indigenous food sovereignty for sure. We talked about lessons learned, that accommodation was made for Indigenous governance systems along with Western governance systems. And more importantly, there was provision made for Indigenous voice. In fact, there were two main advisory committees. One of them was the Indigenous Circle of Experts, and how it's important in establishing food policy that there be ethical space, two-eyed seeing approach, and effective opportunities for Indigenous voice to be shared, heard, and to influence policy. We talked about how to make the transition from, we didn't get into this, but when we looked at colonized systems, food production has been one of the most impactful, and I would say the distance between understanding Indigenous food sovereignty and the relationship to healthy Indigenous communities, culture, the capacity to care for the land, and the impact of agriculture on those communities, those systems, is still just the consciousness about those impacts is just now beginning to surface. There's and just now being discussed. We talked about capacity to manage systems that address Indigenous needs, and the funding associated with it. Someone brought up again the colonial food systems, the land that consume factory farming, and the impact of meat farming, that the impact it has on access to land. We touched on the extraction industry and the direct threat to Indigenous food sovereignty. We certainly see that being played out on the national stage. Environmental destruction and the impact on Indigenous food systems, and too often that policy and food-related projects isn't flexible. Funding for Indigenous communities' capacities isn't sufficiently flexible to address Indigenous priorities. Certainly saw that in COVID, and in particular in northern communities, but not exclusively. And I see, in looking at our poster here, a big one that jumps out at me is decolonize how people view agriculture. So those are some of the points that I recall from our conversation. We could have gone a lot longer. It's important to have this kind of dialogue. There needs to be a lot more of it, but we're thankful to have had the opportunity to share with each other. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Larry, thank you so much. And noted, I think we all could have talked about all of these topics for much longer, but we're thankful that folks came to even share just a little bit for the time that we do have. So thank you, Miigwech. Next, Amberly, did you want to share a little bit about what we chatted about in the school food breakout room?
Happy to. Sorry, I was just waiting for the mic to go off. Yeah, so we had a really great conversation, a lot of diverse expertise and insights I'm happy to give a brief summary of. So at first we talked about kind of where school food was situated and how it was framed in the policy, and that was really around the potential for educational attainment as well as having more communities and students access healthy food. So that led us to one conversation about what is a gap or what could be added, which is recognizing school food as a means to build community as well as local agriculture and agri-food businesses. So we talked a lot about how schools are hubs of community and how that can be an access point for those communities, as well as looking at the existing infrastructure of community food centers and how maybe there could be a synergy or partnership where there is limited infrastructure to catalyze school food programs by utilizing that existing infrastructure. So then that led us to another phase of our conversation, what looked at the limitations of existing infrastructure in school food programs, both the physical infrastructure to prepare food as well as human infrastructure, human resources to actually prepare the meals when we know a lot of these programs are volunteer run. So we heard a lot about the unfunded commitment to the school food program and specifically looking for funding around the infrastructure, paid chefs in schools, as well as really looking at, utilizing funding so that there's a flexible approach to supporting schools where they're at, as opposed to a cookie cutter approach. So really raising all the boats where they are. Specifically, we discussed how the local food infrastructure fund currently in the food policy could be a means to give funds to schools if there was a dedicated infrastructure funding for schools. And then our conversation also looked at food procurement policies, specifically how, considering food safety elements and guidelines on conflict of interest safeguards of marketing to children, as well as, considering cultural foods and how there could be recognition and opportunities to learn about and consume other cultural foods would be important. And just to wrap up, another interesting gap that we discussed was, does school food also extend to post-secondary? And if not in this kind of wave, then what are other supporting mechanisms that can support students in post-secondary who we know also experience food insecurity and other challenges around healthy eating as well? So yes, I could go on and on, but I think that was a relative high-level summary of what we discussed in the school food group. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, next we're gonna go over to Jade. Did you want to share a little bit about what you folks chatted about in the Resilient Communities breakout group?
Yeah, for sure. So resilient communities, pretty huge topic. So I think there's a lot of crossover into some of the other breakout rooms, which is really nice to see where there's connections. Some kind of big themes that came out of our discussion, huge focus on climate change and climate disaster and how that affects our food system and our relationship with food. We talked about not only, adaptation to climate change, but also thinking about mitigation and prevention as well. So how do we plan ahead of time to be able to adapt to climate disaster? So there was kind of a focus on that. There was a big focus kind of just on food production as well, generally. So we looked at, supports for kind of young farmers as well as marginalized communities who want to grow food as well. So thinking about land access, skills development and training for young farmers, for Black farmers, for Indigenous farmers, for folks who want to get their hands in soil. And how do we ensure that knowledge is passed down to these folks? And how do we also ensure that farming shifts from kind of this like corporate export focused food production system to something that is more community focused, to something that is regenerative, to something that is reciprocal with land in terms of how we're relating to it and taking care of the land. There was also, what else did we chat about? Some kind of like great recommendations that came up that were based on best practices already happening that folks shared were formalized land sharing agreements to be able to get young farmers on the land, talking about incentivization for farmers, increase in skills development programs, as well as subsidization of food. So we talked a lot about food access, food affordability as well for communities, specifically thinking about who are the most marginalized folks, so low income folks, disabled folks, Black and Indigenous communities, and how do we ensure that they're being supported in these policies and prioritized. And then we also just chatted a bit about environmental racism and how that is connected to our food system as well. So when we're talking about these kind of like large scale corporate farming practices that are destroying the land, who does that impact, right? And that's mostly like low income and racialized communities. So thinking about those connections as well. But there were so many great ideas.
Thank you, Jay. Oh, thought I heard somebody else. Thank you.
You asked us if we could add something there.
Sure, go ahead.
Just very briefly, I mentioned how since most people now live in urban centers, it's really important to have vibrant, full service community gardens, not just growing food, but all the things around food culture. And that could be a direct link to school programs and to people working of all ages. So I wanted to just add that point.
Thank you so much, Bob. That's a great addition. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next breakout group. Olivia, did you want to share what we chatted about or you chatted about in the food security breakout group?
Yeah, that sounds good. I took all of my notes in the chat though, so I don't have them in front of me. So I'm going off memory. We had some really great discussion. So I would say the main theme that we heard about was the need for income supports and this tension between food security and household food insecurity and how that's being defined and talked about and kind of teased apart. So I think there's a lot of conversation that can happen there, but overall the need to connect with the poverty reduction strategy, which Melana had also mentioned in her intro. So that was great to see that connection. Folks are really seeing tensions between housing and meeting basic needs and just having everyone able to access what they need and have those supports available. So that was a big one. And then to also look at food security from a food systems perspective. So our drivers and our food pathways, who has control, who's making decisions, how are those decisions being made? Who are we including and who are we not including in those conversations? And then a little bit more down to the grassroots level, looking at community-led solutions. So communities identifying their own challenges, coming up with solutions, and really being able to meet their own needs, but to have supports available for that. So income supports, if you need support with grant writing or whatever supports you need to be able to make that happen, and to have communities that have ownership and control of their own food system and food acquisition and non-market ventures. So looking at decommodification of food and more food access and control at the community level. And then also from a national perspective, having a task force that works across departments, across sectors, has measurable targets, accountability measures. I think that is all our dream. So that is what I'm going to end off with. And there was lots of folks that didn't get a chance to share. We had a really big group. So I'm hoping that there is an opportunity for people to contribute afterwards as well.
Yes, there is. Sorry, I'm having trouble unmuting. There will be a link sent out, and Wade will chat to that a bit, or speak to that a little bit, for anyone who didn't get a chance to speak, or anyone who was inspired by what they heard and have more ideas. So just to make sure that we can capture all of that. Thanks, Olivia. Okay, moving on. Vanessa, qu'est-ce que vous avez parlé à propos dans le groupe francophone?
Oui, dans le groupe francophone, on avait la tâche assez impressionnante de couvrir tous les domaines d'action. On n'a pas évidemment réussi à le faire, mais on a concentré nos discussions sur certains points spécifiques que je vais vous partager. On n'a pas réussi à aller aussi en détail comme on avait un vaste sujet à couvrir, mais on a parlé notamment du fait que la sécurité alimentaire devrait être transversale, là, que c'est un peu une utopie que de le traiter à part comme un domaine d'action spécifique. On a parlé aussi du fait que le droit à l'alimentation devrait être au cœur de la politique alimentaire, puis qu'on devrait assurer que le Canada légifère en fait pour le protéger et pour le mettre en action. On a parlé aussi qu'il faudrait vraiment s'assurer que les lois mettent l'emphase sur les populations autochtones puis les personnes qui sont économiquement précaires. Et on a parlé du revenu comme une source importante là, de solutions pour subvenir à ces besoins. On a aussi discuté du fait que la prochaine mouture de la politique alimentaire devrait avoir une approche pan-gouvernementale, en fait, que ça ne peut pas seulement concerner Agriculture et Agroalimentaire Canada, mais que Emploi, Développement social Canada devrait être impliqué, Santé Canada devrait également être impliqué, que c'est pas qu'on ne peut pas traiter l'alimentation éternellement comme une marchandise et traiter la sécurité alimentaire et les systèmes alimentaires en silo de ça. En fait, on ne peut pas faire fi du modèle en place. On a beaucoup parlé aussi d'agriculture, en fait, du fait qu'en ce moment, l'agriculture est axée sur l'exportation. Donc, on priorise là, envoyer nos aliments à l'étranger plutôt que de les conserver au Canada. Puis, on a une agriculture qui n'est pas à dimension humaine, en fait. Donc, on a parlé de comment on pourrait s'assurer que nos producteurs peuvent produire des aliments et les écouler à juste prix en territoire canadien pour nourrir les gens. Et on a eu une longue conversation, relativement longue conversation sur le gaspillage alimentaire, en fait. Comment le fait de détourner là, les surplus pour les écouler dans les banques alimentaires ou dans les ressources crée une espèce de hiérarchisation des Canadiens et Canadiennes et fait en sorte que ce n'est pas une solution qui est durable dans le temps. Et qu'on devrait plutôt se questionner sur aussi le gaspillage nutritionnel, en fait, et s'assurer qu'on met en place différentes lois pour réduire le gaspillage à la source et que le fardeau ne devrait pas être que sur les individus, mais sur les entreprises. Donc, ça fait un court topo.
Merci beaucoup. And yes, thank you for capturing a lot of topics in French and almost all of the topics. So thank you, and acknowledge that must have been challenging. And so last but definitely not least, we're going to move on to the governance breakout room. If Charles, you wanted to share what you chatted about there, please and thank you.
Great. I think Joanna is actually going to give the report back because she took such fantastic summary notes.
Thanks, Charles. We had a really great discussion. One of the things that came up multiple times was cross-departmental, cross-jurisdictional, and cross-scale, and the need for connections and collaboration, and the emphasis here on all of the work that local food policy councils are doing in connection to their local public health units and other areas of municipal government and community. Also, the need for stable and predictable resources. This goes beyond just funding, but to looking at staffing and staffing connections back into policy environments, and also the capacity to reach out to community and to truly be inclusive. There was also the point made that there is no sovereignty without food sovereignty, and that the discussions that happen in broader public policy, in particular around food systems, are really essential. And the example was genetic engineering or gene engineering that came up. Also, there was some really great best practices that were shared as part of our group. So some of the things like looking at community land trusts, kind of coherent or consistent resourcing for local food councils, community university research partnerships, leveraging policies that already exist in addition to building new ones. So there was some really great best practices. Also the need to kind of shake up this top-down mentality or approach to food systems governance. And that there needs to be kind of a holistic approach of how this is being taken into consideration. And there was a lot of other great stuff. I just want to open it up to anybody else who is part of that group to see if you have anything to add. But definitely consistent and stable resourcing, connections across community and scale, as well as repurposing existing policy in addition to creating new, were pretty consistent themes that I think I heard.
Thanks, Joanna. Just going to give it just a bit to hear if anyone's unmuting. Thinking no, but again, it won't be lost. So on that note, thank you everybody so much for sharing all your thoughts. I'm going to pass it back over to my co-lead Wade, and he's just going to talk briefly about next steps and where we go from here. So thank you all for participating in our breakout groups. Wade, take it away.
Thank you, Marissa. So again, we want to thank everyone for all your input on these issues, which form the basis of our collective work. So for us, it's essential that changes to food policy in this country include voices from across the food movement, particularly those voices that have historically been missing from the conversation. And we will continue to work to ensure that government and civil society work constructively as partners towards a healthier food system for all. And so as mentioned, as a follow-up to this session, we will be sharing an update, including a form to provide an opportunity for individuals who are either unable to participate in the consultation or unable to provide the feedback they wanted to share their inputs. I'll just share that link with you in the chat now, but you will also get an email about it later. Also, a recording of this consultation will be made available online, and a summary of our findings today will be prepared and presented to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So we would like to extend our thanks to our guest speakers today, as well as to all of the moderators and note takers who graciously accepted to assist with this consultation. And finally, I would personally like to thank our staff, whose hard work was essential in bringing this together in a very limited time frame. In closing, we hope to continue these conversations with you, and we look forward to creating further opportunities for convening and collaboration. Thanks again, and goodbye for now.